It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman, and this show is brought to you by Audible.com. If you go to audibletrial.com/Opperman Report, and you can sign up for free and get yourself a free audiobook. Now, tonight, if you're listening to our show for the first time ever tonight, I'd like to invite you to visit my website, OppermanReport.com. Because we also have a members section there with content that you won't be able to find live on the radio. It's only found in our members section by subscription. And also send me an email at oppermanreport@gmail.com and let me know what you think of the show, okay? Tonight, we have a very special guest. This is a show I've been trying to do for a while. Very fascinating woman named Betty Medsger, and she's written the book called The Burglary, The Discovery of J. Edgar Hoover's Secret FBI. She's written a couple other books, too. One is called Winds of Change and Framed. Winds of Change Framed. And another one is Women at Work. And she's from New York, I think Connecticut, I believe, the home of Donald Trump. Oh, we were just talking up there about Donald Trump. We can't believe it. I'm going to have a heart attack here on here tonight. But Betty, are you there, my friend?
I am.
So, Betty,
very glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much. We've been trying to get this for a while. I've been going to your Facebook page trying to book this. But finally, one of my producers, Keith Davis, who was great at recommending interesting hosts and guests and topics, finally was able to run down your information for me. So thank you very much, Keith. So, Betty, why don't you tell us a little about yourself, and then we'll get into this whole story about the burglary, about these activists back who burglarized the FBI headquarters and stole documents out of there and uncovered the old COINTEL program.
Yeah. Well, I'm a journalist, and I taught journalism for a while also. I started out as a daily reporter at a small paper, Johnstown, Pennsylvania, the Tribune Democrat, which was actually a Republican newspaper, despite that name. I worked there, and then I went to Philadelphia, and I worked for the Evening Bulletin. And it's interesting when you later see how your contacts early on led to things that you did later. When I was in Philadelphia, my main assignment was that I was supposed to be covering religion, but many of the people in the anti-war movement at that time were from religious organizations, the Berrigan brothers among them, sure, but also other various groups from Jewish, Protestant, Catholic faith were involved in leading the anti-war movement. So it was at that time that I met some of the people who later became significant in telling the story of the burglary. And then after Philadelphia, I went to Washington. I arrived there in the very beginning of 1970 as a reporter at the Washington Post. And it was while I was there that the burglars sent me the files that they had stolen from the FBI office.
Oh, they fed you, you said?
They sent me, yeah.
They sent you?
They sent me. After the burglary occurred on the night of March 8, 1971.
Okay.
And they then went out. There were 8 of them. And they went out to a farmhouse on a Quaker conference ground that was about 30 miles from Philadelphia, quite remote. And they would go there after their day jobs every day and read the files. And then after they had done that for about 10 days and had collated them and chosen the ones that they wanted to send out, they had them organized in packets. And they sent the first packet to 5 different people. and I was one of those 5 people, and I was a reporter at the Washington Post at the time.
Okay, wow. So, did you get a call first, or you just get an envelope in the mail?
No. The burglars were very smart, wise burglars. They planned very carefully. And while the fact that they weren't caught, despite the fact that 200 and some FBI agents were immediately assigned to try to find them, and an intense search that went on for 5 years, one can say that the incompetence of the FBI in that search was very important to the fact that they were never caught. But it's also true that they were very smart. They were people who wore gloves at all times, and they would have never called anybody to say anything about this.
Okay, so you get like a brown envelope with, I suppose, no return address on it, right?
Well, yes, there was a return address on it, actually. It said Liberty Publications, Media, Pennsylvania. And there was no such thing, but I had no way of knowing that. But it struck me as a little unusual. And so when I arrived at work, it was a Tuesday morning, and I found that package. It stuck out from other PR releases that filled my mailbox. And so I did open that envelope right away. And there was a cover letter. And the cover letter said, and the other 4 people had received the same cover letter, by the way.
Okay.
And it was a cover letter explaining that on the night of March 8th, that they had a group of them who called themselves, it's a wonderful name, they called themselves the Citizens Commission to Investigate the FBI. And that the Citizens Commission had broken into this small FBI office in Media, Pennsylvania, and removed every file in the office. And that they had done this because they thought that the FBI, as an arm of the government, was possibly, likely, in their opinion, suppressing dissent. They were strong activists against the war, and of course that was what was most on their mind, and also the civil rights movement. As it turned out, many of them had been involved in the civil rights movement, going south every summer. But they had no evidence, and this was their motivation, and it's really important. People say, well, how in the world could a group of people decide to risk decades in prison, whole life away from their family, those who had children? And they were motivated by what the leader of the group had described as a crime that he thought was taking place, and that crime being the suppression of dissent, which he thought was so precious. And he thought that if Americans knew that their dissent was being suppressed by the government, that they would be very upset. Now, to understand that, I think it's important to realize that J. Edgar Hoover was an iconic hero of Americans, while a lot of activists at that time had suspicions about whether or not he was spying and suppressing dissent. The country as a whole adored him. He was truly one of the most popular people in the country, and at one time he had even considered running for president. But Bill Davidon, the leader of the group, a physics professor at Haverford College, Bill thought that if this was happening, people would be upset about it and they'd want something done. And that turned out to be the case. Now, back to that morning, it was a very unusual thing to have something like this happen. Another piece of context about the time was that this was the first time that journalists had ever been sent secret government files that had been stolen by someone outside the government who then provided them. Now, in other words, whistleblowers are usually from inside the government. But even at that time, up until that time, there were even very few whistleblowers from inside the government. There also was almost no coverage of intelligence intelligence agencies, as far as journalists were concerned, had a free pass. There was almost no investigative reporting about the FBI, with one exception, and we can come back to that later. But that was the same with Congress. There were no intelligence oversight committees. The Attorney General was the official boss of the Director of the FBI, but in fact, almost all Attorney Generals had let the FBI Director do whatever he wanted to do. Katzenbach, just a few years earlier, had been an exception to that, and so had Robert Kennedy. But J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI did whatever they wanted to do and had enormous power, and no one covered them except to do the kind of coverage that his enormous PR operation made possible, sending out constant positive releases.
Yeah,
so I just want to set that background as to how unusual the situation was.
It's so true. It was such a different world back in those days. In '71, I guess I was like in the 5th or 6th grade, but I was following the McGovern and Nixon campaign. But just think, back in those days, you had TV shows like Dragnet, where the cops were the heroes, and
you also had the FBI every Sunday night.
Right. It was on every night?
Every Sunday night.
Every Sunday night, yeah. And
very popular show,
right.
Edited by the network, ABC, made it available for him to edit it. That was part of the agreement of their doing the show.
Right. Whole different world back in those days. And so go ahead, continue.
Well, so I was surprised, to say the least, when I started reading, when I read the cover letter. But one thing, there was no name attached to it, of course. And they said that they were providing these files. There were 14 in that initial package. They were providing them to a group of us in the hope that we would want to make them public. And that if we did, that they had others that they would make available. I had to be a little concerned that I was dealing with a hoax at that point, because it was so unusual. And especially when I got to the first file. The first file contained a phrase, an expression that became emblematic of the media burglary. It was a file that described instructions to agents to behave in such a way that they would make Americans paranoid. That's the actual description. And that it would enhance paranoia, was how it was described, and make people think that there was an FBI agent behind every mailbox. And I realized, of course, that was a pretty startling statement. So I continued reading, and the next file was a description of a program that it said was operating in Philadelphia, and was describing how it was operating, but also said that it was part of a national program. And this was something that also became a thread that ran through everything we eventually learned about J. Edgar Hoover, and that was his obsession with Black Americans. And the program that was described in that initial file was a program where every FBI agent was supposed to hire informers to do full-time informing to them on Black Americans. And when I say Black Americans, I don't mean people who were suspected of crime or people who had any kind of record of violence or crime, but just Black people in general. And there was a list of the places where Black people should come under surveillance. The corner store, their schools, their libraries, bars, restaurants, classrooms, in high schools, in colleges. I mean, when you read it, it was a description of the places where the average person might go any day of their life. And that's where the informers were supposed to go and then write reports on black people. And then it turned out, as another file spelled out, that as I mentioned, every FBI agent in the country was supposed to hire an informer to report to him, and they were all hims at that point, on black people, except in Washington, D.C., where every FBI agent was supposed to hire 6 full-time informers to report to them on a regular basis on the activities of black people. And black students were a particularly significant target. Every campus, there were documents in those original files that spelled out how they were supposed to establish informers on every campus in that area of Pennsylvania, but that also was going on again elsewhere in the country.
Well,
so the racial aspect of it was really something to read.
Now, how old were you when you received this document?
I think how old? 1971. 1971, I was 29 years old.
Okay, now you pull up this document and you're reading about a police state. Were you in shock, or was this? Because when I'm hearing this, I'm terrified hearing this. Now, what was your emotion when you were reading this?
Well, I was shocked. I did keep thinking until I got to later documents. I remember I'd been a reporter in Philadelphia, and so I started seeing names of people that I had covered, and so I realized this probably is real.
Right.
So I was in shock. I went out to there was a cluster of us who covered specialties off at a corner office off the newsroom at the Post. And as soon as I was done reading them, I went out to the national desk and I told them what I had received. And they had just had a call from the man named Ken Clausen, who was the national staff reporter who covered the FBI and the Justice Department. And he had called from his desk up there in the press room outside the Justice Department, asking if we had received any of these files. And the people on the desk that said no. But as soon as I walked out, they realized I probably had what he had been talking about. And the reason he placed that call was that he knew from his
Okay, yeah, we just lost Betty again. That time the call just totally dropped. We might have said FBI too many times, but we're calling again now. Oh, my goodness. Or maybe it was something on her end. That would be terrible, because this is a fascinating story. This is incredible. We have with us tonight Betty Medsger, and it's the story of the burglary, the discovery of J. Edgar Hoover's secret FBI. And let's see, we're calling again here now, see if we can get her back. I hope her phone didn't just die out altogether over there. Let's see. Betty Medsger. Coming up next week, we have Tom Secker. We're going to be talking about the FBI bombing at the World Trade Center, the first one back in like 93. About his theories about that. Then we have coming up Don Kessler. Betty. Oh.
The person whom you're trying to reach is currently unavailable.
Okay, that might be the wrong number. Yeah, I'm going to have to call from over here. 1 second. Coming up after that, we have Donald Kessler. And what I'm going to be talking to Donald Kessler about is his book about the U.S. Secret Service. And we're also going to be talking about Adnan Khashoggi. He wrote a book about Adnan Khashoggi as well. He's a Pulitzer Prize winner and a New York Times best-selling author. And he just wrote that story about how... oh, you know what? I have this saved. I can go right over here and do it. And we're going to be talking to him. 812. About... yeah, we're going to be talking to him about his new book that just came out, where he interviewed the... what's going on? I'm not getting through it at all. It's not even ringing. Maybe my internet's down. That would stink. Yep, something's wrong here, guys. Something is wrong here, that's for sure. Because this ain't getting through at all. Add the contacts, it's added. Try again. Something is very, very wrong here, unusual. I don't know what to do. We may have to just play a... yeah, I'm not getting through it, Betty. Something is very strange here. Get rid of that plus, try that. That shouldn't be there. Okay. Oh, we're not getting through at all, man. And I'm really getting nervous about this. Okay, let me check this number again. A1, 2. Okay. She's in the contacts. This is the number here. Okay, we're calling her. Oh, nah, it's bouncing again. Ah, boy. She's not on over there. I don't think we're going to be able to get through. There's something very strange. Or maybe she can call me. If I can message her on Facebook. And she can try and get through to me here. Okay, let's try getting through to over here. Sorry about this, guys. We totally lost the call on Skype here. I'm not getting through. And very unusual, because my Skype works pretty darn good. And I don't have these problems. Oh, hey, she's calling me. Okay, great. Hey, Betty.
Hi, Ed. I lost you on the phone. I'm trying to call back on Skype. Is this good?
No, this is great. But I called you like 20 times. I was trying to get through. I couldn't get through.
I didn't get a ring. Sorry.
Well, you want to know what? You sound a lot better now, too. Your audio sounds 100%
okay,
better.
We'll stick with Skype then.
Okay, great. Oh, well, thank you, Lord. Thank you, God. Because I hate talking for 2 hours, let me tell you.
Pretty low tech here. I'm glad we, between the two of us, we managed. But what happened?
I was getting worried there, because we were just talking about the police state, and the next thing you know, we lose Betty. Okay. So where do we leave off? About you knew some of the people that were in these documents.
I was going to the question of authenticity, and the Post reporter knew that these two members of Congress, McGovern and Parra Mitchell, had gotten the same files that I had just received, and that they had turned them into the FBI. Both of them had put out announcements saying, we think that there should be questions raised about the FBI, but we don't want to have anything to do with this crime, and therefore we're giving the FBI these files. So the FBI, when Ken described the files I received, they said, yes, they are FBI files, and you must not publish them. So we had our confirmation at that point that they were authentic.
Okay. And
from that point on, I'm off working on the story. But what I didn't realize as I worked on the story was that throughout the afternoon, the Justice Department, John Mitchell was the Attorney General. And some of your viewers may remember John Mitchell. This was the Nixon administration we're talking about. And John Mitchell later went to prison because of his involvement with another burglary, the Watergate burglary. But this day, in 71, just a couple of years before that, he's desperately trying to prevent the Washington Post from writing a story about these stolen files. What we didn't know, and I didn't find out until many years later when I got the 34,000-page investigation of the burglary under the Freedom of Information Act, was that the New York Times and the Los Angeles Times were the other two people who had gotten the files, and they too had turned them in, not with any public announcement like the member of Congress, but they had turned them in to the FBI and not written about them. And that also, all of that goes to show, again, what the culture of the time was like, that everybody who received them, realized that they were very important, but was so intimidated by the power of Hoover and the FBI, and just thought that this was none of the press's business to be writing on anything like this. So, although you asked me how I felt, yeah. I was shocked, but I also was naive, because one of the things that comes out of how young I was at the time was that I didn't fully realize the enormous power of the FBI. But more than that, I was too young and too new to Washington to be part of that culture of protecting intelligence agencies. So to me, it simply seemed like this is very important information that the public needs to know. And again, what was happening while I was doing that was that the Attorney General was calling Ben Bradley, the executive editor of the paper, Ben Bagdickian, the national editor of the paper, and Catherine Graham, the publisher of the paper, actually calling each of them more than once throughout that afternoon, trying to convince them not to publish the file. And he said, as we've come to know since then repeatedly, what is said when officials are trying to get people not to publish is that you will endanger national security. But then even stronger than that, that you will endanger lives if you publish this. And fortunately, it was possible to read all of these files and to know that that was not likely, not possible. They were not the kind of files that were going to endanger national security. They were going to reveal operations against Americans who were not the object of law enforcement and who had done nothing wrong. And it showed the behavior instead of the FBI. But what I also didn't know until I handed in my story at 6 o'clock that night was that as of that moment, they assumed the story was not going to be published. Catherine Graham did not want to publish, and the legal counsel for the paper, who had been part of the discussions all afternoon and evening, also believed that they should not be published. And the good luck that I had was that Ben Bradley felt very strongly that they should be published and continued making the case through the evening. And finally, at 10 o'clock, the latest time when they could make a decision for the next day's paper, at 10 o'clock, Catherine Graham reversed her decision and said that they should be published, and it was published the next day on the front page of the Washington Post and on other front pages of papers that received the Post wires. And that was the first time that Americans had information about how the FBI was operating. And one of the very strong reactions that was almost immediate was from some members of Congress who had never said anything against J. Edgar Hoover, but also editorial writers, comparing it to the Stasi. I mean, that information about the surveillance of black neighborhoods throughout the country, and also the use of government informers on campus switchboard operators and others. That did cause people to think this is like a police state. And editorials were written that raised that question. How can this be in a democratic society that we would have a law enforcement agency behaving like this?
Yeah, let me interrupt you because we've got to take a little commercial break. But people should know that the Stasi was the East German secret police that was wiretapping everybody all over.
Right, I should have said that.
Yeah, well,
right.
you know, not everybody's our age, you know.
No, right. And watched everybody. I mean,
yeah. But we are tonight. We're here with Betty Medsger, fascinating woman. Thank you so much. She's the author of The Burglary, as well as Winds of Change, Framed, and Women at Work. And there's a link to each of these books on the Opperman Report blog. You can go there right now, click on these books, and read little descriptions on them and stuff like that. We'll be back with more of Betty Medsger right after these messages. And now, a word from our sponsors. Pacific West Bamboo, your premier source for sustainable building material. They provide construction-grade and craft-grade bamboo material for all your indoor, outdoor, and gardening needs. Contact them for event planning and display building as well. 503-839-8126. Or you go to their new website, pacificwestbamboo.com. Or you can contact them on Facebook at Pacific West Bamboo. That's 503-839-8126. Amanda from Pacific West Bamboo was our first sponsor. She's been so good to us, so please support her in return. I want to make everybody aware of our new members section at www.oppermanreport.com. You can go there and sign up for a monthly, quarterly, or yearly subscription. You can even purchase episodes one by one. You get full access to brand new original content, new guests, new uncensored interviews, my own investigations and reports, and we're going to be adding sections with documents, images, police reports, either provided by myself or by my guests, or for my own investigations, my own reports. So you can go to oppermanreport.com and you can sign up there tonight. You can start listening tonight. Strawman. I want to mention Strawman. Strawman is a band out of Toronto, Canada. They're good friends of the Opperman Report. They're a trio of guys who share the same mindset most of us here do, and they put that energy into their words and music. So check them out at strawmanmusic.com and drop them a line to let them know that you heard them here on the Opperman Report. We'll be doing an interview with Sean Duffy soon. You can get an autographed copy of my book, How to Succeed as a Private Investigator, by visiting my PI website, emailrevealer.com. We also offer a computer and cell phone forensics. We can recover deleted text messages to uncover infidelity. We offer asset searches, locates, email tracing, background reports, and we can even trace your spouse's email address back to internet dating websites to catch them cheating online. You can reach us at 800-572-9762, or you can email me at emailrevealer@aol.com. New World Mexican Women. Everyone loves the New World Mexican Women, and their line of fine, handcrafted, authentic Mexican jewelry of stone mosaic and abalone stone inlay. In their first book, titled New World Mexican Women, available on lulu.com, they teach you how to make this jewelry, and they have a collection of love letters to their men from their hometown that have immigrated to the United States to find work. They have also published a new book entitled Azuquina to the Rodeo. It's about a young girl that falls in love with a rodeo bull rider, and she runs away with him without telling her family. You can find the New World Mexican Women by Googling New World Mexican Women. And you can ask them about their deals on wholesaling their fine jewelry and all of the other projects that they have going on. If you'd like to have your business or website advertised here and promoted all over the world on dozens of stations every day, give us a call at 800-572-9762 or email oppermanreport@gmail.com. And now back to our show. Okay, welcome back to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. We're here tonight with Betty Medsger, the author of The Burglary, as well as Winds of Change, Framed, and Women at Work. and you can find a link to all those books on the Opperman Report blog. Oh, boy. Now, first, I got a couple questions for you. First of all, are all these FBI documents, are they available in the book?
No, they're not all available in the book. I do quote from some of them, okay. But you can Google online and find quite a bit now about the there's a publication, Win Magazine, a little over a year after the burglary. Win Magazine put out an anniversary issue that had all of the media files that had been distributed, and that is online, and it's a very valuable resource, and I recommend it to people. And we haven't gotten to COINTELPRO yet, but you also can learn quite a bit about COINTELPRO files that were the most important discovery in the end, I guess, that came out of the media files. And you'll find quite a bit about COINTELPRO online now. Can I just comment on something you did, and I really appreciate in describing what Stasi was? I should have done that. Stasi was this awful secret police of the East German government, and there were informers everywhere, family members spying on family members, friend against friend. And what's interesting to me is that was so widely known in our society, and that the fact that people immediately made that connection. You mean that could be happening here, when they described what was happening to black people, what was happening on campuses, and then years later when we learned much more about the vast array of people that it was happening to. That, more than anything, making that connection with Stasi was propelled the calls for the FBI to be investigated.
Yeah, there's a great movie in black and white. It's a German movie with subtitles. I don't know the name of it off the top of my head, but you could find it. It's a classic. I think it's on Hulu all the time.
Well, are you thinking of The Lives of Others?
Yeah, that's probably it. Yeah, that's a great movie. Yeah,
it's a beautiful movie. It came out less than a decade ago, and as far as surveillance is concerned, I think it's probably the best movie you can find. It's truly excellent. It's a German-made film, and I think it won the Academy Award.
Right, very chilling. It's very
very chilling.
Yeah.
Very chilling.
Okay, so continue with the story. Go ahead.
Where would you like for me to go from here? There are a number of directions.
Well, you know what? I'd like to hear about the burglary itself and how they pulled that off and the details of that.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. By the way, I mean, maybe I should describe also how I came to know who they were. Okay. Because they did evade discovery for forever. They were not known until January 7th of last year, when the day that my book was published, and Joanna Hamilton's documentary, 1971, The Story of the Burglary, came out at a private showing that night in New York, and then a few months later, we premiered at the Tribeca Film Festival. But until then, they were publicly not known. How I discovered them was that many years later, living there, working there, and I hadn't been back for many years. And so I filled up my schedule with appointments with old friends and acquaintances that I had known all those years earlier. And the first night, I was at John and Bonnie Raines' home. John and Bonnie Raines are two of the 8 burglars. And when I had called and said I was coming to town, they said, "Come to dinner." And so we had a lot of catching up to do. We weren't close friends then, but we were We had been acquaintances and people who had liked and respected each other during those years. I'd been in Philadelphia in the late 60s. And so we were catching up with each other. And when we went to the dining room table, short time later, the youngest of their 4 children, who had not yet been born at the time of the burglary, Mary, came into the room to ask them a question. And when she did, John said, "Mary, this is Betty Medsger, and we want you to know, Betty, because many years ago, when your dad and mother had information about the FBI that we wanted to give to the American public, we gave it to Betty." And I was absolutely stunned. I had never had any idea who the burglars were, and I certainly never would have thought that it would have been John and Bonnie Raines. Couple by that time living in the suburbs. John was a professor of religion at Temple University, and Bonnie was an advocate for children's issues and had been an executive at various public interest children's agencies. And so we talked about little else the rest of the evening, and that was the beginning of my desire to write a book. And they then went to the leader of the group and told him that I wanted to do that, and they had revealed the connection. And then he got in touch with everybody else, and that was the beginning of my project. And through all the years that I've worked with them, even to this day, now that they're out there speaking publicly and everybody, I am still just amazed at what they did. The goal of the entire thing was the public interest. It's sort of an expression that has lost its power, but these were people who decided that they were willing to risk decades in prison for the public interest. And it was Bill Davidon who had gotten the idea. And he then got in touch with the Raineses and all the other people involved. Keith Forsyth, part-time cab driver at the time who had dropped out of college in Ohio to work full-time against the war. Bob Williamson, student at St. Joseph's, a Jesuit school in the city, who by that time was working as a social worker for the state of Pennsylvania, but also working as much as he could against the war. Excuse me. 2 people whose names, who told their stories, but their names are not in the book, who all one an academic, another one who was in graduate school preparing to be in a health profession. And then there was an 8th burglar who I never found, and she's emerged in the past year, she has a very different story from the rest of them, a quite remarkable story, and I hope we can get to that. So what happened was that everybody he asked, and there was a 9th burglar, by the way, somebody who dropped out right before the burglary and who knew everything they were going to do and never revealed them, which is interesting because it certainly was frightening to think about the possibilities of how he could have made it impossible. But they worked from late December until March 8th. First planning strategy, and then casing night after night in the neighborhood, in this old suburban town, Media, Pennsylvania, county seat of Delaware County. And the FBI office was on the 2nd floor of a residential building, of all things. It was a small brick building where the first 2 floors in the basement were office buildings. Some other were government buildings, like a draft board office. And then on the 2 floors above were apartments, and people lived in these apartments. And the building the front door was open and well lit at all times, and you went up a central staircase that people in these apartments went up and down at any time. So there was no way that they could plan for what those people might decide to do when they were going to burglarize an FBI office. So for months, they watched the patterns of when people came and went, from the building, and there was a courthouse. The county courthouse was diagonally across the street, and there was a guard 24 hours a day in the glass opening front door of that courthouse, looking right out where they would park and get out of their cars and go into the building. There was no way they could guard against that. They just had to hope that maybe his attention would be diverted. They also watched the patterns of traffic, the police patterns. Well, when did the police do rounds? And the people who lived across the street. They did that systematically, beginning in early January until right before the burglary. And one of the first things that they did was choose a night for the burglary. And that turned out to be very important. At first, it seemed as though one night might be just the same as any other night. But one of them, and they can't remember which one it was, one of them remembered that they had read that there was going to be an incredible boxing match the night of March 8th. And it was going to be a boxing match between Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier.
Oh, sure, I remember that. Yeah.
It was just an amazing event, and it's still considered the fight of the century.
Yeah.
And it was big for several reasons. First, Ali had been convicted for draft evasion. I believe it was 6 years earlier, and the boxing commissions around the country had immediately cut him off, even though that wasn't required that they do that, but they had. And he was very political, and so a lot of people in the sports world, they loved him as a boxer, but they hated him politically. And he, in the meantime, had spoken quite a bit, really around the world, was an internationally known figure and much loved figure. Nelson Mandela remembers waiting for news of this boxing match from his prison in Robbins Island.
This is the first one?
This is the first one. He had done some sort of practice matches in Atlanta, but this was the first one after it was the first one after he was convicted.
It was huge, and it was played in movie theaters around the country.
Well, that's a very interesting point.
First time.
There were promoters were making a lot of money on this, as you can imagine. Yeah. But when the tickets became available in Madison Square Garden, they were sold out within hours. It was a capacity crowd. But the people who were promoting it got an agreement that no American television network or radio network could broadcast it. In the meantime, they were selling the broadcast rights overseas, so the people in other countries were able to see it on their local networks. But in the United States, the only way that people could see it was if they happened to live near any of the few theaters in the country where the promoters were broadcasting it live. One of those was in Pittsburgh, by the way, and it was outside. It was in a drive-in, and it happened to be a very cold night. But people wanted to see this fight, and they were willing to endure anything. Yeah. So, but again, even people were upset about that. But the burglars had decided that the burglary should take place this night because they thought there would be white noise from people watching, listening on their radios and televisions. And even though people couldn't see it in the United States on their homes, they were still glued to their televisions and their radios. What happened was that they had pool reporters who would report between the bouts on the action that had just happened. And you still had some of the sound of the fight, and certainly the sound of the people talking about the fight. So Keith Forsyth was the person in the group who was volunteered to do the actual break-in. The rest of them were waiting at a motel about 2 miles away. And the plan was that he was supposed to go to the motel and do the break-in and then go back to the motel and tell them, okay, the coast is clear. Okay. So he had been teaching himself in the Raines attic how to break in from the lock. He had gone, looked out at the outside of the FBI door, saw what kind of lock it was, went to a hardware store and bought 2 duplicates of that lock, and one to take apart so he could understand it, and then the other to break in. And he thought he had it down so they could break in 30 seconds. But when he arrived at the door that night, there were 2 locks, not 1 lock. And the second lock was much more complicated and one that he could not break in. And this was extremely upsetting, as you can imagine. So he called back to the motel, and Bill Davidan said, "Come back." And so they decided in some very tense minutes that Bonnie Raines had done inside casing when she posed a couple weeks earlier as a college student writing a paper on the hiring of women. And she had interviewed the agent in charge of the office. And she was really in there, of course, to scope out the entire area. And so she said, there's that other door that opens into the hall, and it has this very large filled cabinet in front of it. But it doesn't, they thought it probably didn't have a double lock, and it didn't. And they decided that despite the great risk of knocking over that cabinet and the length of time that it would take, that's what he should do. So he went back. But this time, instead of just having his simple break-in tools, he had a crowbar. And it was a very slow, meticulous process. There was a deadbolt at the top of the door. He had to break, and it made a loud noise. And then he had to stretch out on the floor and very slowly break open the door. And while he was doing that, he heard this loud clank at some point. It sounded like metal against metal. That's all he thought. Is that a gun? Somebody cocking a gun. And finally he talked himself down, decided, okay, I just got to do it. Finished, went inside in the dark, and there was nobody inside. Made the door look like it was closed. Went back, and then the rest of them came. 4 people in the dark, each of them carrying 2 large suitcases. And in the dark, they took out every file from filing cabinets and desks and put them in the suitcases. And then came down the stairs, called from an FBI phone.
Oh, my God.
Back to the motel, and said, okay. And then the burglars who were driving the getaway cars came and parked in front, and they loaded the cars, and they drove off to the farm where they sorted the files over the next 10 days.
Wow. What an operation, man.
It seems just amazing that it could be planned. And by the way, I left out the fact that while Keith was down there on the floor with his crowbar, he did hear the sound of the fight from radios, televisions upstairs. And in fact, within the next couple of weeks, as FBI agents interviewed people, including upstairs in that building, they said that they did remember that evening, but that they were watching the fight and that they weren't aware of anything else happening. So the fact that they chose that night turned out to be very helpful, I think.
Now, is there a statute of limitations on this crime?
Yeah, when Hoover had announced publicly, shortly after the files became public, that he thought that they should be charged with espionage, which, as we know from recent cases, is quite serious. And on some espionage statutes, there is no limit on the statute. But Hoover died a little over a year later, and I'm not sure who's responsible for it, but in the end, the charges under which the statutes under which they would have been charged were burglary statutes, and that expired 5 years after the burglary. And the case was closed at that point. But that's not publicly announced. So they had no idea whether the statutes of limitation had run. But they had made a promise to each other, and this is a very important point we haven't mentioned. On the last day that they met, 10 days after the burglary, at that farmhouse, on that day, they agreed to two things. First of all, that they wouldn't associate with each other after that, because they're of concern that the arrest of one could lead to arrest of another. And the other thing that they agreed to was that each of them would take the secret of the burglary to their graves. And when I met the Rains all those years later, and they told me the secret, they also told me that this agreement exists. And so when I got back in touch with them a few weeks later, I said, will you talk to the others about that promise you made and reconsider it and be willing, I hope, to recognize that this is an important story, an important piece of American history that's missing, and that I would like to tell your story.
Yeah, these people are heroes.
Well, I think so.
Yeah.
And we should, say that also what this led to. And it was the files themselves were very important, but those kinds of things have a way of dying down, especially at a time like the early 1970s, when you move from one big thing to another. Like, for instance, 3 months later, the Pentagon Papers came out. Daniel Ellsberg gave the Times and the Post the Pentagon Papers, and that sort of overtook. The media files had come out like every 10 days to 2 weeks until sometime in May, and then the Pentagon Papers came out. And there were many aspects of that riveted public attention. And then we had Watergate. But as it turns out, there were a number. The efforts continued to move in a quiet way to do something about what they had revealed. I mean, the first thing that happened that was the call by some members of Congress and by leading editorial writers for an investigation of the FBI. And everybody who called for an investigation, nearly everybody who called for an investigation, thought that Senator Sam Ervin from North Carolina, should be the person to lead such a committee in an investigation. And he didn't respond for quite some time. And he's someone that went on to great praise just a few years later as the chair of the Senate Watergate Committee. But even back then and earlier, he was considered the person who loved and defended the Constitution more than anyone else in Congress. And so he was urged over and over to do this. And finally, in late April, he publicly announced, I'm not going to do this. I think Mr. Hoover is doing a fine job.
Really?
And this was in stark contrast to the things that he had said earlier about surveillance and what a terrible thing it was in a democratic society. So what happened after that, about a year later, a journalist named Carl Stern, he was an NBC television reporter who covered criminal justice. And Carl happened to be in the office of the Senate Judiciary Committee. And while he was waiting for someone to get a file copied for him, some person he had met in the office said, look at this. And it was one of the media files, and it was a file that ended up probably being the most important file. And all it was a form to go to be attached to a file, a label. And at the very top in big block letters was the word COINTELPRO. And that meant nothing. to Carl, and it certainly didn't mean anything to me when I saw it and wrote about the file that was attached to it. And at the bottom of this cover sheet,
well, you know
labeled,
what? Let's stop there because COINTELPRO is a huge, and we have to take a break for another 3 minutes and 40 seconds. So we'll get into that when we get back from the commercial.
Okay.
But great stuff, man. You're my hero. Okay.
No, I'm not a hero.
No, trust me, you're my hero. Okay. We are here with Betty Medsger, the author of The Burglary, as well as Winds of Change, Framed, and Women at Work. You can get a copy of these books if you go to my website, OppermanReportBlogspot.com, and click on the link there. It goes straight to Amazon. Picked it up tonight. We'll be back right after these messages. And now a word from our sponsors. Pacific West Bamboo, your premier source for sustainable building material. They provide construction-grade and craft-grade bamboo material for all your indoor, outdoor, and gardening needs. Contact them for event planning and display building as well. 503-839-8126. Or you go to their new website, pacificwestbamboo.com. Or you can contact them on Facebook at Pacific West Bamboo. That's 503-839-8126. Amanda from Pacific West Bamboo was our first sponsor. She's been so good to us, so please support her in return. I want to make everybody aware of our new members section at www.oppermanreport.com. You can go there and sign up for a monthly, quarterly, or yearly subscription. You can even purchase episodes one by one. You get full access to brand new original content, new guests, new uncensored interviews, my own investigations and reports, and we're going to be adding sections with documents, images, police reports, either provided by myself or by my guests, or for my own investigations, my own reports. So you can go to OppermanReport.com and you can sign up there tonight. You can start listening tonight. Strawman. I want to mention Strawman. Strawman is a band out of Toronto, Canada. They're good friends of the Opperman Report. They're a trio of guys who share the same mindset most of us here do, and they put that energy into their words and music. So check them out at strawmanmusic.com and drop them a line to let them know that you heard them here on the Opperman Report. We'll be doing an interview with Sean Duffy soon. You can get an autographed copy of my book, How to Succeed as a Private Investigator, by visiting my PI website, emailrevealer.com. We also offer a computer and cell phone forensics. We can recover deleted text messages to uncover infidelity. We offer asset searches, locates, email tracing, background reports, and we can even trace your spouse's email address back to internet dating websites to catch them cheating online. You can reach us at 800-572-9762, or you can email me at emailrevealer@aol.com. New World Mexican Women. Everyone loves the New World Mexican Women, and their line of fine, handcrafted, authentic Mexican jewelry of stone mosaic and abalone stone inlay. In their first book, titled New World Mexican Women, available on lulu.com, they teach you how to make this jewelry, and they have a collection of love letters to their men from their hometown that have immigrated to the United States to find work. They have also published a new book entitled Azuquina to the Rodeo. It's about a young girl that falls in love with a rodeo bull rider, and she runs away with him without telling her family. You can find the New World Mexican Women by Googling New World Mexican Women. And you can ask them about their deals on wholesaling their fine jewelry and all of the other projects that they have going on. If you'd like to have your business or website advertised here and promoted all over the world on dozens of stations every day, give us a call at 800-572-9762 or email oppermanreport@gmail.com. Now back to our show. Okay, welcome back to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. Don't forget the show's brought to you by Audible.com. Go to audibletrial.com, audibletrial.com/Opperman Report. Sign up for free, get yourself a free audiobook, and that helps support the show. Now, if you're a brand new listener, it's the first time you're hearing this show. We do this kind of work every week. These are the kind of shows we do every week. Please visit my website, OppermanReport.com, and send me some feedback. If you like the show, suggestions for future guests, at OppermanReport@gmail.com. We are here tonight with Betty Medsger, the author of The Burglary, The Discovery of J. Edgar Hoover's Secret FBI. She's written a couple other books, too. Winds of Change, Framed, and Women at Work. And Betty's very... we got to thank people like Betty for sticking their necks out for us here and educating us about this kind of stuff. Everybody throws the word COINTELPRO around these days, but these are the people that really did the hard work to let us know about it. So, Betty, you were telling us about COINTELPRO. Yeah,
about the accident that uncovered it. I mean, the accident beyond the burglary itself.
Right.
I was mentioning the fact that Carl Stern, NBC reporter, was in the office of the Senate Judiciary Committee when someone handed him that file from the media file that said COINTELPRO. And I asked him, do you know what this is? And he said, no, I never heard of it. And at the bottom of this cover sheet, it said that it was a memo instructing FBI agents to distribute the attached article, which was about how college administrators should exert more control over anti-war protesters, how they should deliver it through anonymous letters to college administrators who are not friends of the FBI. And that really struck Carl as unusual. He didn't realize that the FBI was in the business of writing anonymous letters. And so he decided to find out what COINTELPRO was. And he wrote to the acting director of the FBI, Pat Gray, and to Kleindienst, who was then I believe, the acting attorney general. Watergate was having a big impact at that point in creating a lot of acting rather than permanent officials. Right. And they turned him down and again said, as they had said to the Washington Post the day we received the files, that COINTELPRO must not be revealed because it would, to do so, would endanger national security. And they never explained what that was, what that would mean. And so Carl kept asking, and they kept saying no. And finally, the acting attorney general said, "This is the end. I will not deal with this any further." And at that point, and I think we're in late 1972, Carl sued under the Freedom of Information Act. The Freedom of Information Act had been passed in 1966, and no one had ever gotten anything out of the FBI under the Freedom of Information Act because Hoover had instructed FBI officials to ignore any request that came in under the Freedom of Information Act. So Carl sued, and a judge ordered the FBI by the summer of 1973, I believe it was, to hand over. And all Carl was asking for was the documentation of the founding of COINTELPRO that would define what it was. He wasn't asking for the files of the program itself. And finally, a judge ordered them to do that, and they refused. And the Justice Department prepared to appeal. And another emergency event took place in Watergate history, and it was the night that was called the Saturday Night Massacre, yes, when Nixon fired a series of attorney generals and their successors, one after the other, because they refused to fire the Watergate prosecutor. And by midnight, the person who was attorney general was a person who had just been solicitor general, and that was Robert Bork. And Robert Bork is known in history primarily for the fact that Democrats in the Senate fought fiercely during the Reagan administration and successfully to keep him from being on the Supreme Court because of how conservative they thought he was. And in fact, he was as an appeals court judge. But during these months, right after he became acting attorney general, he decided that COINTEL should become public, and he ordered the FBI to provide the documentation to Carl. And this was the beginning of what you could call an avalanche of what we came to learn about the FBI. As what those founding papers documented was that COINTELPRO was a series of operations, each guided against a specific community of people. The first one against the communists, one against the Socialist Workers' Party, others against black activists. And they became more and more nebulous. The last one was against the New Left, which was just about any liberal that he realized was out there being an activist, and organizations. So it was directed against organizations and activists as individuals. But what was one of the things that was important about COINTELPRO was that it was not the gathering of intelligence for law enforcement purposes or for any constructive purposes. It was putting informers in place to harass people. And that harassment took many different forms. I describe it as going from crude to cruel to murderous. It involved doing such things as breaking up having as a goal to break up marriages by sending false letters to a partner about husband or wife, and they're never finding out the truth. And then it had more serious aspects to it, more physically harmful aspects to it, of setting group against group. And this was especially true in the black community. And it was most powerful in the Black Panthers, but also in groups that were completely nonviolent. I mean, in Hoover's mind, Martin Luther King's organization, Southern Christian Leadership Conference, was just as much of an enemy as the Black Panthers were, and he paid equal attention to them. And so the idea was to destroy individuals, destroy organizations that he thought had bad ideas that he disagreed with. And that included the women's movement, included the gay movement, as small as it was at the time. And the thing that was discovered that probably is most remembered was his long and ugly campaign against Martin Luther King that involved sending tapes in which he tried to convince him that he should commit suicide. Because then this was done just a short amount of time before he was to go to Norway to receive the Nobel Peace Prize. He had made recordings of King's hotel conversations with women he had met, and sent the recordings to both King and to Coretta King, his wife. And that was not known until the COINTELPRO information started coming out. And once again, just as when the files first came out, when this was learned, there were cries now for the FBI to be investigated. And now Hoover was dead, and many people will tell you who were involved back then will say that the investigations never would have taken place if Hoover had been alive at the time. And I think that's probably true, because the power was just, the threat was so great. The files that we then learned that he had on members of Congress and other people. So what we learned came out gradually, beginning with what Carl started revealing in late 1973, and then actual COINTELPRO files started to emerge little by little. And then there was a tipping point And the tipping point was a story that Cy Hirsch wrote in the New York Times in December 1974 that revealed that the CIA, in violation of its charter, had massive domestic surveillance projects that had been going on for more than a decade. And that also increased the anger. The CIA was not supposed to be doing any kind of domestic spying except as it related to objects of their surveillance overseas with enemy countries. So when that happened, it truly was a tipping point. And within weeks, before the end of January, both houses of Congress had passed resolutions to create committees that would conduct investigations of all intelligence agencies. And the one that became better known and had the most impact was the Church Committee, named for Senator Frank Church from Idaho. It did very significant investigations of all intelligence agencies. And that led to recommendations from those committees to Congress. And some of the most important ones were the establishment of permanent oversight committees. Oversight committees had never existed before, oversight of intelligence. And these investigations led to the permanent oversight by the House and the Senate. Also led the Attorney General to make a number of guidelines for the FBI, which came under the Attorney General. They ended up being much less meaningful because every new Attorney General could change them in whatever way he or she wished to do so. And maybe one of the most important things that happened as a result of the burglary was that in 1974, as we were learning more and more about the activities, the dirty tricks and the violent things that were done, was the strength that Congress strengthened the Freedom of Information Act. It had been very, very weak, and strengthened it so that agencies had to respond to people. They could still prolong it and make it very difficult and cause you to have to go to court to actually get anything. But it did strengthen it quite a bit, and that was a very meaningful reform that came out of all of this.
Oh, boy. Well, let me ask you a couple of questions, because I've had people on here who felt that the church committee hearings were pretty much like a whitewash as well. Now, you have a lot of good faith in them?
No, the church committee was not a whitewash. The church, we had never had anything like that. Maybe what the questioner is thinking about is what happened afterwards. I mean, we're talking, the church committee hearings started in 75, and then the final recommendations were 76. And so there was a period there right in the middle of the 70s where there was a lot of action, a lot of reform taking place. But maybe what the listener is thinking about is what happened as of the election of Ronald Reagan as president. After the reforms that had taken place, even the removal of COINTELPRO, not just COINTELPRO files, but political surveillance files at the order of the FBI director, then we entered into a different kind of period. It was the first presidential campaign where intelligence agencies became part of the campaign. And one of the things that Reagan said in his campaign was that if elected, that he would unleash the FBI and give it back the power that the church committee and members of Congress had taken away. And that did start to happen. His first attorney general, William French Smith, immediately diluted the attorney general guidelines, and that the FBI at times then started doing some of the same kinds of dirty tricks. Never as bad as it had under Hoover, but some that were very bad. And the pattern that started then was that this would go on for a while. Nobody would know about it. Then it would become public, or there would be a story, and there would be a call for an investigation. There would be a hearing, and the information would become public of what the FBI was doing, for instance, for the solidarity organizations in connection with El Salvador.
Right.
And then the FBI would apologize, and there would just be a mild slap on the wrist, and no one was ever punished. And that was in contrast to some of the things that did happen in the mid to 1970s, where some people were punished, 3 top officials, including the man who became Deep Throat, Mark Felt, but who in fact, when people know his history, is much less heroic than we think from Deep Throat. He was one of the Hoover's top aides, had approved absolutely despicable COINTELPRO projects, and was in fact, along with another top aide, convicted for his unlawful activities. And again, one of the first things that Reagan did, which had a very important symbolic and actual impact, was to pardon those 2 high FBI officials for what they had done.
Oh, really? I wasn't aware of that.
Yeah. So that a lot of investigations took place, even from not just in Congress, but also in the Justice Department during the late 70s. And at times they were going, for instance, the New York FBI office had become, just like the Philadelphia office and some other major cities, had become so focused on political surveillance, COINTELPRO activities, that other forms of crime were hardly being followed. And this was when the investigations went on, then there became a focus on going after those people in those offices and for whether they had engaged in criminal activity. And there was pretty much general agreement that many had, but then it finally focused on, okay, let's go only for the people at the top. And then Reagan destroyed what had happened when that approach was temporarily successful. And by the way, I mean, one very important COINTELPRO project that I should mention, everybody, I think, knows about Martin Luther King.
Sure.
There's also something else that was very extreme, and that was Fred Hampton,
Right.
Black Panther leader in Chicago, who was murdered by Chicago police officer. But the FBI was involved in the planning of that, to the point of having an informer in the apartment, ingratiating himself, and then drawing a map to where the shooter should go, drawing an arrow, Fred's bed, pointing out the side of the bed that he slept on. They were directly involved in that. And then the shooter, not the shooter, but the FBI informer who made it possible, had a letter of praise and a financial reward for his role in making it possible for Fred Hampton to be killed. And then on a lesser but incredibly awful level also, where an example would be the false testimony planned by the FBI, informers being trained to give false testimony that led to convictions of people for murder, including one person in Los Angeles who served 27 years in prison for a murder that he did not commit, all because the FBI simply wanted to get rid of him and didn't have truthful information, so made up information.
And who was that? Do you remember?
I'm sitting here trying to remember like crazy. Geronimo Pratt.
Oh, Geronimo Pratt, of course.
Geronimo Pratt, yeah.
Oh boy, I had Mark Rudd on the show, former Weather Underground, and he said that one of the reasons why he wasn't his charges were thrown out was because of COINTELPRO, FBI misbehavior, kidnappings, and stuff like that. Do you have any specific information on that?
You're talking about the Chicago 7 case, I assume.
No, I'm talking about the Weather Underground bombings in New York City. That he skated all those charges, he said, because of that they were all thrown out because of FBI misbehavior and kidnappings and such.
Well, I cannot speak directly to his case. That's for sure. One of it's interesting. I mentioned earlier. I mean, what he said is possible. Yeah. I just don't know. One of the things that is interesting to note is that by being this kind of agency, and remember, we're talking really about a half century. We're talking about from 1924 until Hoover died in 1972, where he was from the beginning forming an agency that was built around his political hatreds, is one way to say it. But one of the most important results of that, in addition to what it did to destroy dissent among many Americans, is that it prevented the FBI from accomplishing its mission as a law enforcement agency. I mean, for instance, there were many bombings in this country in the late 1960s and early 1970s. There isn't an instance of the FBI, despite all of these informers that they had out there, getting information that led to the prevention of any of that crime. And I find that rather remarkable. I mean, you would think that would be the goal. If you have an army of informers out there, that your goal would be to prevent crime, and that was not the goal.
Well, do you think that they had enough agents in there that they were just allowing these things to go on?
I think that they were so that the mission was so distorted, that the mission was so based on his hatreds and a desire to destroy individuals and organizations, that people weren't trained in how to get actual information that could have led to arrest, but more importantly, to the stopping of violent actions that led to deaths.
So you think that even though they were so entrenched into all these leftist groups, right, and had so many informants in there and so much agitators in there, that still they weren't aware of these?
Well, don't forget, we're talking about them being entrenched mostly in groups that were not doing anything.
That's true, too, yeah.
Not doing anything violent. Yeah. They were people who were using their right to dissent perfectly within their rights. So the emphasis was just in going after anyone who had liberal, let alone radical ideas. And in the end, that meant that they sacrificed being a law enforcement agency, a good law enforcement agency.
Do you have any specific information on infiltration with the Chicago 7?
I don't.
Okay.
I don't. I mean, I've read over the years much about at the time of the convention, the FBI and the Chicago police too certainly were infiltrating many of the groups that were coming to Chicago.
Yeah, NYP. I'm from New York, as you can probably tell from my accent. But, I guess you picked that up, right? But NYPD at the time also had their own Red Squad, that would.
And so did in Los Angeles, where you are now. Yeah. Well, actually, I think almost every major city did.
And did any of those documents come out in your work?
They didn't come out in my work. I mean, my work is focused completely on the FBI, and I was not researching what those police departments were doing. Okay. But I have read about it through the years. I mean, just in the same way that any other citizen might. I know that was going on extensively.
Okay, we're coming up to another half-hour break here. So we're here with Betty Medsger, the author of Burglary. She's also written Winds of Change, Framed, and Women at Work. And we'll be right back with more of this after these messages. And now, a word from our sponsors. Pacific West Bamboo, your premier source for sustainable building material. They provide construction-grade and craft-grade bamboo material for all your indoor, outdoor, and gardening needs. Contact them for event planning and display building as well. 503-839-8126. Or you go to their new website, pacificwestbamboo.com. Or you can contact them on Facebook at Pacific West Bamboo. That's 503-839-8126. Amanda from Pacific West Bamboo was our first sponsor. She's been so good to us, so please support her in return. I want to make everybody aware of our new members section at www.oppermanreport.com. You can go there and sign up for a monthly, quarterly, or yearly subscription. You can even purchase episodes one by one. You get full access to brand new original content, new guests, new uncensored interviews, my own investigations and reports, and we're going to be adding sections with documents, images, police reports, either provided by myself or by my guests, or for my own investigations, my own reports. So you can go to oppermanreport.com and you can sign up there tonight. You can start listening tonight. Strawman. I want to mention Strawman. Strawman is a band out of Toronto, Canada. They're good friends of the Opperman Report. They're a trio of guys who share the same mindset most of us here do, and they put that energy into their words and music. So check them out at strawmanmusic.com and drop them a line to let them know that you heard them here on the Opperman Report. We'll be doing an interview with Sean Duffy soon. You can get an autographed copy of my book, How to Succeed as a Private Investigator, by visiting my PI website, emailrevealer.com. We also offer a computer and cell phone forensics. We can recover deleted text messages to uncover infidelity. We offer asset searches, locates, email tracing, background reports, and we can even trace your spouse's email address back to internet dating websites to catch them cheating online. You can reach us at 800-572-9762, or you can email me at emailrevealer@aol.com. New World Mexican Women. Everyone loves the New World Mexican Women, and their line of fine, handcrafted, authentic Mexican jewelry of stone mosaic and abalone stone inlay. In their first book, titled New World Mexican Women, available on lulu.com, they teach you how to make this jewelry, and they have a collection of love letters to their men from their hometown that have immigrated to the United States to find work. They have also published a new book entitled Azuquina to the Rodeo. It's about a young girl that falls in love with a rodeo bull rider, and she runs away with him without telling her family. You can find the New World Mexican Women by Googling New World Mexican Women. And you can ask them about their deals on wholesaling their fine jewelry and all of the other projects that they have going on. If you'd like to have your business or website advertised here and promoted all over the world on dozens of stations every day, give us a call at 800-572-9762 or email oppermanreport@gmail.com. And now back to our show. Welcome back to the Opperman Report. I am your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. Show is brought to you by Audible.com. Go to audibletrial.com/Opperman Report. Get yourself a free audio book. We're here tonight with Betty Medsger, the author of The Burglary, as well as Winds of Change, Framed, and Women at Work. And I got to tell you, we have been treated tonight to a real education, like a real valuable lesson in American history of the FBI and at a controversial time in our history. And Betty, I can't thank you enough. Your presentation tonight has been outstanding, and I cannot thank you enough. I'd like to ask you this. Yeah. Where we are today, right? How do you feel? Do you feel like like we're in deep trouble now, like it's 100 times worse, or that we're at the same level, or do you think things have gotten better?
Well, I don't feel so good. Yeah. I always feel so good about working with these people who took the little concept of citizen responsibility so seriously. I know I always like to think that their story says so much about the importance of asking questions. I mean, most of us can never engage in a serious act of resistance. I mean, don't have the courage, but at least we can keep asking questions of all kinds. And when we speak or show Joanna's film, 1971, people say, what can I do? I mean, sometimes for me, it really comes down basically to that. Ask questions and demand answers. When I was working in the last few months of my book on when Edward Snowden's files started coming out, and Joanna and I both were keenly interested and were just sort of amazed that here we had another person, this one inside rather than somebody from outside government, that the only way that we were learning all of this important information was because somebody was willing to risk the rest of their years to make the information public. And we've learned a lot. I think many attitudes, if the polls are correct, many attitudes have changed. I often think about what's the difference. I think that the congressional action to peel back on the NSA's ability to retain the records, it's significant, but there's so much that we learn that's not had anything done to it by Congress or the Obama administration. Surveillance of Americans, but also surveillance of our allies, not just our enemies, right, but also our allies overseas in massive numbers. And I find it discouraging that there's been so little, what feels to me like so little reaction in this country. Fritz Schwartz, who was the legal counsel to the Church Committee and was in charge of the investigations, has written a book recently called Democracy in the Dark. And he has called for a congressional investigation of NSA. And I think that he would readily say that, again, it should be all intelligence agencies. There seems to be no appetite for that kind of thing now. No interest in Congress in saying, okay, let's find out what is happening in each of these agencies. We found out about torture in the CIA. There's probably a lot more for us to learn about in the CIA, the FBI, and NSA. And I don't feel an appetite for that. and Mr. Schwartz believes that it will happen, but it's going to take much more time. I think it's a different time in that when the media files came out, even though this went against the culture of protection of intelligence agencies, there also was a culture, a strong culture among a significant minority of people that we should speak out against the war and raise questions about the war, which was a new thing for Americans to do. So that fueled part of the public and also Congress to be willing to take the step to say something needs to happen. This should not be going on in a democratic society. I think also the fact that the war was going on far away, and despite some extremist rhetoric, there wasn't a sense among many Americans that they felt endangered. They didn't think that the war was going to come home. And so that also wasn't a factor in people being willing to show more courage about investigating intelligence agencies. But now, I think, despite the number of years that we are away from 9/11, I think that there is the strong, and we're certainly being told this continuously, that the war can come home at any minute. I think that is the existence of that fear among a significant number of people also makes us less likely to say to Congress, something needs to be done about this. And I just have to say, I don't have enough knowledge or understanding to know what's likely to happen. Are we likely to become more concerned and say that we do not believe in massive political surveillance rather than targeted surveillance, the endless expansion that technology makes possible, or are we going to say this must change? I don't know.
Okay, couple of questions. Well, first of all, who's going to call for this? Who's going to call for this? Who's going to object to this surveillance state we live under now? Even if people, it seems like people do object, but the media doesn't object at all, and the Congress certainly doesn't object. Here's some little lip service by Rand Paul the other night. So, you know what I'm saying? It seems like even the media now and Congress, this oversight, all this kind of stuff, it's all rigged.
Well, there are more reporters covering this than ever before, and major news media have multiple people covering these things. But that's also changed in very, what I consider dangerous ways. The technology that is now focused on people inside the government, insider threat, is a large program that we still do not understand the full dimensions of. But if it's believed that someone is in touch with the news media, they're at any time, the government has the capacity with federal employees to monitor their phone calls. I don't mean listen in, although they could do that, but I just mean keep a careful record of everything, who they're calling, who's calling them, how long they're talking. Federal employees in Washington wear those tags that register when they enter and leave their buildings, and the same with the press in Washington. So for the journalists who are paying close attention to this, the surround feels like a very tight circle, and makes this kind of coverage increasingly difficult. There are quite a few people that are quite dedicated to doing it and do very significant stories. But the pressure on the journalist and the sources inside is enormous, and the Obama administration has increased it and brought charges against more whistleblowers. I mean, war on whistleblowers sounds like an extreme thing, but I think if you were a potential whistleblower right now in the federal government, you would indeed feel as though there's a war on whistleblowers, because it's extremely difficult to figure out how you can get the information out. You are placed in a position where you have to take an enormous risk.
You know, it's interesting because the irony of it is, I had Richard Lambert, the FBI agent who was in charge of the anthrax investigation. And I had him on the show. He's just recently filed a lawsuit against the FBI. And he had written a memo criticizing the FBI investigation into anthrax. Then he left the FBI, went to work for the Department of Energy in security. And they took a lobbyist law where you're not allowed to contact your old employers, But he's in security. He has to contact the FBI as part of his security job for the Department of Energy. They took that, fired him, and raided his offices. So it's kind of ironic that they would go after an FBI agent, himself, who is normally on the other side. But you're absolutely right.
That's terrible.
Yeah. But now I have a question for you. When you see these cases today, right? When you see these local plots, these terror plots, and they arrest the guy for plotting terrorism. And then it turns out that the people he was plotting with were all FBI agents, and they were supplying him with a fake bomb. It seems like the whole thing was an operation.
Yeah, and there are quite a few of those. There's a book, I believe it's called The Terror Factory, which is about these plots that are largely manufactured. The author has pretty strong evidence on it, by the FBI and informers. I come back again to a large amount of incompetence. One of the things that I fear in what's come out of 9/11 is that the fear and the motivation to stop everything, was so great, and the technology had changed so much, that law enforcement felt that they would use whatever technology they had to the max and surveil everyone and just suck in as much as possible, whether you're talking about phone calls, mail, email, whatever. And that in itself has turned out to be the creation of incompetence. Instead of taking new technology and figuring out how to shape it very well so that it can target rather than take in massive everything, that it's turned law enforcement agencies into incompetent agencies. And they in turn go back to lean on, in order to have an accomplishment in the end, they lean on informers too much, just as J. Edgar Hoover did. And also it leads to the creation of the kind of false cases we're talking about, where the testimony comes out gradually and we find that people were led into becoming something that many, if not most of them, did not want to become, and then they're arrested in the process of being supposedly about to commit the terrorist crime. There have been some documentaries that even included the video in the cars as the informers were talking, with the people that they wanted to participate in the crime, and where you saw the people clearly were not interested, and over days and days they were convinced by the FBI agents that there would be a better life ahead for them if they committed these crimes. You feel like you're watching the mob at work.
Yeah, I would agree with you. Now, we're coming toward the end of the show, okay? It's 6:49, so we've got about 10 minutes left, and then we're going to drop a couple of stations. But I do go another hour. Would you like to stay and try and take some phone calls and continue this? Because I know you wanted to tell me also, too, about one of the burglars who had left the group and something about that.
The one who left a group, and then the eighth burglar would be found. I'd be happy to talk about it. If you feel there's interest in going ahead, sure, I'll be glad.
Oh, you kidding me? I'm loving this.
Okay.
I'm like at the edge of my seat. Listen, normally I'm interrupted all the time. Let me tell you. Okay. I'm really, really enjoying this story. I'm enjoying it. It's kind of
it's a pretty awful story.
But this is the kind of stuff that we're fascinated with, and I know my audience is loving this. But we're going to lose a couple of the stations that we're on in about 10 minutes. So what would you want to leave us with in this last 10 minutes?
I guess the most important thing is the citizens being aware. The thing I worry about the most is people sleeping and feel either people being sleeping or because of the culture that numbs them, or just having developed a lack of interest. I met a 20-year-old who said, "I don't think I'll ever vote," and it wasn't an angry statement. It was just like I don't have any responsibility. And I think that the message of the burglars is that people can make an incredible difference by asking questions and sometimes going far beyond asking questions.
You think so still today? Because I get a lot of people on here.
Don't you think Snowden's made a difference?
No. I'm sorry, I don't. And even Cynthia McKinney, she came on here. I get a lot of people come on here. And they say, oh, yeah, we can vote out the rascals, that kind of optimistic kind of attitude, which I love, and there's a side of me that would love to. But let's look at the election we have right now. If we're going to vote out the rascals, who are we going to vote in? Even Bernie Sanders. Do you really trust him and endorse what he's saying?
Well, I want to know what he thinks about more issues, for one thing. I mean, I respect what he's saying, and I like what he's saying, but I don't have much idea of what he thinks about racial issues. And that's a very important issue to me, and I think in this society should be. But look, I'm old. I've voted a lot of times, and most of the time I wasn't voting enthusiastically. But right now I'm voting the same way, for instance, that I voted, I imagine this will be true, the same way that I voted in 1968, when most of my friends were determined not to vote for Hubert Humphrey because of how angry they were about his not having more courage in opposing Johnson within the White House on the war. But my chief concern then, and it's a big concern now, as far as who's president is concerned, is the Supreme Court. Wow. And the Supreme Court makes a huge difference in whatever direction you care about. And so I think that we have, as far as voting is concerned, we have to have the Supreme Court in mind.
Well, okay. So then, did you support Obama?
I'm talking personally now. Yeah, I supported Obama personally.
Okay, but we put Obama in, but did anything really change? It's the same policy as we had under Bush. Do you think there was any difference that we benefited from Obama over Bush? Looking back,
I think the things would have been much worse with a Republican
with Romney
administration. I mean, I don't like what's happened with the wars now, but I think that a Republican administration backed by a Republican House and Senate, that the wars would have been even worse. I think that in the last few months that Obama has been a much stronger person in regard to some of the issues that some of us cared about back then. But I want to say, I don't have much. For instance, right now, this is not my area of expertise right now, by the way, and I'm speaking about my personal opinions. But I don't have much hope about what will happen in the next election. Mm-hmm. I think that as it's going right now, that whoever is elected is likely to be a pretty strong hawk. So in that sense, I don't approach this with a sense of hope, but I believe it's terrible to drop out, and that we need to work in whatever ways we can. And as I said, as far as my vote is concerned, my vote has the Supreme Court as its goal, and I guess that's my main thinking right now on this.
Yeah, I can because it does seem like our vote does have some effect on these kind of social issues, you know, not any kind of economic issues or foreign policy. Doesn't seem to me, but I guess some of these other issues we do have some effect.
Well, one of the things that concerns me is that because Democrats in the House and the Senate after Obama was elected didn't stand up and fight about issues that if he had been a Republican, they would have stood up and fight. They're now in a weakened position if they have a Republican who engages in some of the same activities, especially concerning civil liberties and surveillance issues.
Yeah, but don't you find like a lot of times I think that they like to put a Democrat face in there, and they steal more of our civil liberties under the guise of this smiling face looking at us, like with Bill Clinton, and even, I hate to say it, even Jimmy Carter. You know, we lost a lot of our freedoms under Jimmy Carter as well. You know, not that I would ever endorse, you know, Reagan or Bush or any of those characters, but.
Well, it's very clear, though, that because Jimmy Carter wasn't elected, that a lot of things happened under Reagan that would not have happened under Carter.
Very true.
Including the reforms that were on a pretty good path under Carter as far as surveillance was concerned.
I'd love to get Carter in there now. I love the way he talks now. Let's bring him back, man. This is the Carter we need. Oh, boy. Yeah, but even Carter doesn't seem to be very optimistic about our situation in this country right now.
No, pretty pessimistic from what I've been reading, yeah.
Oh, boy. Okay, we're coming to the end of our show here. I'd like to take some calls. 702-605-4894. We're with Betty Medsger, the author of The Burglary. She's also written Winds of Change, Framed, and Women at Work. And I'd just like once again to say that if this is the first time you've ever listened to this show and you're enjoying the show, I really want to thank you. And send me a message at oppermanreport@gmail.com. And let me know what you think of the show. And also visit the website, oppermanreport.com, because we have a members section there with all kinds of content in there that doesn't make it on the air. It's all like private content that I do these interviews during the week for members only. So I'd really appreciate you taking a look at that and tell me what you think of that, because we really want to welcome all the new people listening. I'm very excited to have you on board. And Betty's books. Betty, what about these other books real quick? We got about a minute before we drop these other stations. Framed and Women at Work and Winds of Change. Give me an idea. What are those about?
Well, the first book was Women at Work. And Women at Work is actually a photo book with text blocks. I left the Washington Post to do freelance work. I left later in 1973. And I spent a year traveling all around the country taking photographs of women in traditional and non-traditional work roles. Women's movement was very much alive at the time, and to my surprise, I couldn't find any body of photographs that showed women at work. And so that the only images that people had were traditional work roles. And I particularly had children in mind, although the book is not specifically a children's book. And so the message I wanted to convey was that women can do all kinds of things. And I wasn't pushing just the idea that women should go into non-traditional things, but that all of these roles were valid if people wanted to do them. So you'll find a woman lobster that I went to sea with in Maine, and a school teacher in Washington, D.C., a nurse, and also a surgeon. I mean, it's just a thorough combination of women at work. And then that was an exhibit that traveled around the country and other countries quite a bit in 1975, 1976.
And you took the pictures yourself?
I took the pictures myself.
Oh,
yeah,
very nice. Okay.
Yeah. So I have a bit of a career as a photographer, and mostly my photography with that book, and for a couple of years after that, before I returned primarily to teaching and to writing, was on breaking down stereotypes, and disability was also an area that I worked with, taking photographs of physically disabled people who lead independent lives, which was a relatively new thing at that time. And the other, the next book was...
Well, you know what? Let's take a break, and we'll get to the other books when we get back.
Okay, great.
But also two people... It's a 3-minute, 40-minute break, the same as last time, okay? And also two people can call in, 702-605-4894. We'll be back with Betty Medsger, author of The Burglary, Winds of Change, Framed, and a photo book, Women at Work, where she took all the pictures herself. And we'll be right back after these messages.